the last several years when I visited Southern California. I grew up in Long Beach, and when I come out during the summer to visit with my family, it's become my custom to come up to university for Chevra Torah study because number one, I know Rabbi David's very well, and number two, because it's the closest to what I am used to doing at home. So it makes a nice experience for me when I am traveling. And Rabbi Davids was kind enough to invite me a number of times over the last several years to be a guest teacher, which has been a privilege. And when he and Risa had the opportunity to go to Israel, he called me up and said, Tony, would you fill in for a couple of weeks for Chevra? And I said it would be my privilege, my honor to do so. So I'm very grateful that he gave me the opportunity to do that and that I'm able to be together with you all this morning. I had a chance to touch base with Rabbi Davids this week. I know he and Risa arrived safely in Jerusalem, and they are there, and I hope they have a wonderful time. Those of you who know Rabbi know he is, above all else, a lover of Zion, and it's a wonderful thing that he and Risa are able to make this trip back, especially with as crazy as the world has been over the last couple of years here. So we hope they have a wonderful time and that they will come back again home in good health. So that being said, let's do a blessing for study. I have the blessing queued up here, so let me pull it up here so we can all do it together. Hopefully you can see. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So everyone, please join with me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Bless you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot and commands us to busy ourselves with words of Torah, and busy we are indeed. Who knows what the portion is this morning?
Chayei Sara.
Chayei Sara, fabulous.
Genesis something, I don't know.
So I thought about how I wanted to introduce Chayei Sara to you as part of our conversation. What I realized is Chayei Sara is one of those Torah portions that we know really well, right? There's a number of portions of the Torah that we just kind of know. And we know them even if we haven't really studied them, because the stories that make up these Torah portions are ones that are familiar to us. Either they're ones that we talk a lot about, or the ones that we read at significant times of the year, or they're ones that form kind of part of the backbone about who we are and what we believe as Jews. And Chayei Sara is definitely one of these that forms kind of the backbone of who we are as Jews and what we talk about and what we believe. The first part of the portion, of course, has the story about the death of Sarah. And we read the fact that she dies in an advanced age of 127 years old, and it's very sad, and Abraham has to go to try to find a burial site for her. And so he goes and he humbles with Ephron the Hittite to buy this cave at Machpelah that he can have a place to bury his wife Sarah. And there's a lot of midrashim about this, and some say that the 400 shekels that Ephron charged him, some say that he gave him a great bargain. I mean, what can you get these days for 400 shekels, right? There are other midrashim that it says actually the opposite. And actually Ephron was trying to screw it, right? That he was cheating and that he charged this an exorbitant amount of money. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. What matters is that Abraham buys this piece of land. And in doing so, he helps to cement his presence in the land. He is a sojourner at this point. He's a stranger. He's a wanderer. And he even admits that with the people when he's speaking to them. But buying the land and then burying Sarah there in that cave, and the fact that he digs the wells that he digs, all of these things helps to reinforce the fact that Abraham, and by extension his descendants, will have a claim to the land of Canaan. And it's very, very important for us to know that and understand that. Now, this place, this cave at Machpelah, it's where Sarah is buried and where Abraham gets buried. It's where Isaac and Rebekah are buried. It's where Jacob and Leah are buried, right? Rachel is buried on the road to Ramah. She dies as she gives birth to Benjamin, and it's very sad. Traditionally, there's midrashim that tell us that actually Adam and Eve are buried in the basement in the cave of Machpelah. And the fact of the matter is, you used to be able to go there, right? Is there anybody on the Zoom call who ever actually went to the cave of the patriarchs? Okay, so Brad's been there. Okay, a few used to be before the first Intifada. You could go to Hebron And you could visit the cave of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the tomb there, and you could visit it and see it. Nowadays, it's theoretically possible to go there. It's an iffy prospect. It's kind of dodgy, right? Because it's deep within sort of the Palestinian-held territory. And the cave of Machpelah has become one of these flashpoints of violence between between Jews and Muslims. And definitely since the mid-90s, there was, many of you may remember, there was a terrible terrorist attack. There was an American-born settler who went to the cave and opened fire and killed 20 some odd Muslims while they were praying at the cave of Machpelah. And since then, even before then, it's become sort of this iffy prospect to go and visit that place. That's the first part of the Torah portion that we read. Second part of the Torah portion deals with this story about Isaac needing a wife. And we get this image of Isaac, and I've talked about Isaac before. Isaac is kind of he's a nebbish, right? He's kind of a clunk, right? We get this image that he's living on his parents' couch, right, at 37 years old, and he's not accomplishing a whole lot with his life. And Abraham is greatly concerned that Isaac is going to marry one of these local shiksas, right? And he says, we can't have this. He says, we need to find a proper wife for my son. So he sends his servant Eliezer. He says, go back east, go back to where I come from, and find a suitable wife from amongst my kin. Right? And Eliezer goes and he defines this test. He's gonna ask these maidens, and the one who shows the right kind of inclination and the right kind of hospitality, that's the one I know is going to be the right one for my master's son, and it'll work out just fine. So he goes and he do this, and we have this opportunity where he presents, he talks to the maiden, and he finds Rebecca, and it turns out that Rebecca is the daughter of Bethuel, and Bethuel is the son of Nahor, and Nahor was Abraham's brother, right? So not only does he find Abraham's homeland, he finds Abraham's family, and he finds this beautiful woman, Rebecca, and she comes back to marry Isaac, and so Isaac kind of marries his second cousin once removed. I think I got that right. For those of you who know genealogy, send me a correction and we'll correct it, right? But they get married. We know that part of the story, all right? I don't want to talk about any of that this morning. I want to talk about something at the end of the portion that's actually, it's something that we probably don't talk a lot about. It's something that we don't give a lot of attention to. And the reason is because it's uncomfortable. There's an uncomfortable aspect to the story that we're going to read this morning. And that's why I think it's important for us to read it and to look at it. So if you look in the chat, Hannah posted the study sheet that I prepared for this morning, but I'm going to do a screen share just so we can look at it all, but you're certainly welcome to click on it. I think when you click on it, it'll open, or you can download it, but I'm going to do a screen share so we can take a look at what we're doing here. So let me pull this up. And we'll go take a look at this. So hopefully you all see in my screen. And we're taking a look at this document here. Now, so what I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, we see it.
Yeah, okay. If as we go along, if you got a question, if you got a comment, just shout out. All right, go ahead and give me a shout out or send me a chat. I got the chat window open. So if something comes up that you're curious about, you want to ask about, knock your socks off. That's what our time is for here, is to look and study at this stuff together. So let's read through the first part of this and we'll start to hack at it a little bit. So this is Genesis 25, verse number 1, for those of you maybe who are looking on in a Chumash, or if you want to go back and check it out in the Plout or the Stone or the Hertz or any other Chumashim after class. So Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimron, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbach, and Shua. Jokshan begot Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Ashurim, the Letushim, the Leumim. The descendants of Midian were Ephah, Ether, Enoch, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were the descendants of Keturah. Now, you're lucky that I didn't pick anyone to read that. We read it in my Torah study here at Chayei Shalom this morning, and there was this lovely, lovely woman who comes to Torah study every week, and she had to try to pronounce all those names, and it was definitely an adventure, so you're lucky on that. All right. So here I said before that this is a problematic text. This is a difficult text for us to process. Why is this text so hard? What's the problem at the heart of this? Who knows? Don't be shy. Why is this a challenge? Yeah, Steve.
There are all these other kids of Abraham that we really don't know about or discuss, and we don't know what happens to them.
And all these other kids of Abraham, right? And that's problematic for us because Abraham is Abraham's our patriarch, right? Abraham is the founder of the Jewish people, and it's problematic that he's having other kids, especially because the thrust of the covenant, right? The core of the brit that God has promised to give to Abraham goes through his children. And we already know that Isaac sort of has this status as being Abraham's heir, right? And so it's problematic that he has all these other kids that come after him. What else is problem? Yeah.
Do we know if this is in the Quran also?
I don't know, Steve. I can't tell you. I have not looked in the Quran. I haven't compared as to whether the genealogy that is given for Ishmael in Quran, or even if there is a genealogy for Ishmael in Quran, if it's the same or not. I can't answer that question. Now, there is something significant about the genealogy. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. So just a little put a post-it note on that. We're going to come back to that. I don't know everybody's name, so I see you raising your hand. You're in front of the Western Wall, so go ahead and ask me your question.
Hi, Cindy. Two things. Midrash says that Katura might be Hagar. And secondly, the next line is, but to the sons of Abraham's concubines.
Yeah,
he marries Katura. So who are all these concubines?
Yeah, good. Beautiful. Fabulous. That's a great point. That's exactly where you're heading. I just want you to hold that for about 3 minutes, okay? We're going to absolutely get there, all right? That's a problem in this text with the fact that Abraham is getting married again, all right? What happened to Sarah, all right? What happened to his love and devotion for his wife? Now listen, I live and work here in Boynton Beach. I have two sort of big kind of constituencies in this congregation. I got a lot of younger people who are raising their children, and I got a lot of older retirees. Okay, it's not the demographic makeup of a lot of congregations usually kind of looks like that. Mine looks like this. It's an hourglass. I got a lot of people at the bottom. I got a lot of people at the top. Because of the nature of this community, I have a lot of couples who are getting married for the second or third or even fourth times for some of them, who've had prior spouses who've passed on. And it's always sort of this problematic kind of deal when a spouse remarries. You know, maybe you've sort of seen this kind of thing in your own community, right? When people get remarried and suddenly there's a question about the new spouse or the new kids. And it brings up all kinds of stuff, right? That's absolutely part and parcel of what's bothering the rabbis when they look at this. Now, as Cindy, Nancy? Cindy, fabulous. As Cindy pointed out, right, there is a midrash that suggests for us that this Katura was actually Hagar, right? And we're going to take a look at that. So take a look here at the commentary of Rashi. Okay, Rashi was one of the first great biblical exegetes, one of the first great biblical commentators, right? He lived in France about 1,000 years ago. Rashi's very significant in Jewish study. Rashi writes the foremost commentary to the Talmud. In fact, he always gets pride of place in the Talmud. If you ever open up a folio of Talmud, Rashi's commentary is in the inside closest to the spine. Rashi's commentary on the Torah becomes the most important one that we rely on. And all the other rabbinic commentaries on the Torah, and to some degree, are sort of copying what Rashi did. Just a bit of trivia for you, Rashi is also incredibly important to French scholars who study the history and the development of the French language. Because there are words that Rashi uses, old French words in his writing. And those who are curious about the history and development of the French language, they look to Rashi because they find these words that were extant in sort of early French or old French 1,000 years ago. So Rashi does this. What Rashi says to us, he says, this was Katura. This Katura that we talk about, this was Hagar. Nobody other than that, right? But she has this nickname, right? Why does she have a nickname? Well, because her deeds were as fragrant as Ketoret, as incense, right? Any of you who are familiar with Song of Songs, right? This beautiful erotic poem that is part of the Hebrew Bible. There's language in there that talks about this thinking of one's lover or one's partner as this beautiful, fragrant, lovely kind of thing, right? So here we have this idea that she was fragrant, her deeds were lovely, and that's why she was called Katura.
Excuse me, Rabbi. That's my favorite song of songs. Barbara Streisand sings a song to her husband about that.
Beautiful.
I love that song.
Beautiful. There you go. Good. So we know that, right?
Wait, but wasn't she exiled with Ishmael, and why did she somehow come back alone?
Good. So that question is a good one. Hold on just a second. You got 2 Post-it notes now, Steve. Just give me a second. Let's just get through it. The other reason she was called Katura was because she kept her entrance closed, Kishura, right? A bit of a sort of kind of comment about the kind of person that she was. She was very chaste. She had not allowed herself to have any knowledge of any other man since the time that she had left Abraham. Now, this type of language actually is kind of it's not uncommon that we read in Torah. So some of you remember, Moses dies at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and it's actually Joshua who does the conquest of the promised land, right? Now they go to conquer the city of Jericho, and Joshua sends a couple of spies in the city of Jericho. And who are the spies? Does anyone remember who helps the spies when they come to the land of Jericho? Anyone remember? It's a prostitute, right? They're helped by a prostitute whose name is Rachav. Okay, now, if you've been to Israel, how do you say street in Hebrew? Rachov, and it's called that because it's wide, okay? And so the name Rachav, it's a bit of a play on words, right? Why is she called Rachav? Why is she wide? She spreads her legs wide, okay? She's a prostitute. That's her job. So Kishura, okay, or Katura or Hagar is the opposite of that. She's this chaste woman who has not sort of allowed herself to have be accessed by any other man, right? Now, Steve asked this question, wait a minute, I thought that Hagar was exiled. So remember, Hagar and Ishmael were driven out of the camp, right? The Torah portion last week. Sarah was bitter. Sarah was angry on account of Ishmael and the fact that she hadn't born a son. And there's a later interpretation that says actually Ishmael might have been doing some questionable things with Isaac, and therefore they were driven out of the camp. They don't really go very far, however. Hagar and Ishmael end up at a place called Be'er Lahai Roi. And actually that's going to be important, as we're going to see in a couple of chapters, well, not a couple of chapters, in a couple of minutes here when we get a little further on in this portion of Torah, because we're going to return to that place, okay? So though they weren't living in the encampment, Hagar and Ishmael were still in the area, right? Hagar was Egyptian. She hadn't gone back to Egypt. She was hanging out locally, okay? So the first idea here is a suggestion that this Katura, this new wife that Abraham had, it was just Hagar, right? It wasn't anything to worry about. Now how does that solve our problem? How does it make it easier to accept that the woman that Abraham marries is Hagar? How does that help to solve this problem that we have in dealing with the text that Abraham got married again? How does it make our lives easier? Don't be shy. Anybody?
Well, she already bore Abraham a son, so these are just younger siblings.
She was already part of the family, right? She'd already been in the community. She already had a relationship with Abraham. It wasn't some stranger that was coming in, right? It wasn't one of these locals. Remember, Abraham was worried that Isaac was going to marry one of the local shiksas, right? So the fact that she was already part of the community was significant. But actually, it's even more significant than that. Who was Hagar's son? Ishmael. We already know that the brit, the covenant, the inheritance is not going to Ishmael. God's already told us that. The Torah has already told us that. We know that the brit, it's not going to Ishmael. Fine. Okay. Now, if it's not going to go to Ishmael, by extension, it cannot possibly go to any of the other sons of Hagar, right? Because if it was going to go to one of the other sons of Hagar, they'd first have to get through Ishmael, right? So the fact that this Keturah was actually Hagar, it's a way of the Torah of saying, or the Midrash are saying, or Rashi is saying, listen, it doesn't matter, because even if Abraham married Hagar, even if one of these other sons wanted to rise up in possession and take control over the breach or whatever, they wouldn't be able to, because it's not theirs. God has already decided it's going to go to Isaac, and whether it's Ishmael or any of the other siblings, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. Right? Now, the next little bit I want to sort of take a look at here is a comment by Rashbam, and we're going to see this at the top of the page here. Rashbam lived, a generation or so after Rashi, and he says, Keturah, he says, listen, according to a straightforward reading of the text, this is not Hagar. Right? Basically says, it's not Hagar. Now, I like this because Rashbam was Rashi's grandson. Okay? So essentially what Rashbam is coming along, he's saying, my grandfather didn't know what the hell he was talking about. He was completely wrong. Right? It wasn't Hagar. It was some random other woman. Brovnell, writing a couple hundred years after that, basically says it's not even a problem. Right? What does he have to say? It's extremely strange that Abraham would take another wife and have 6 children with her at his advanced age. He's saying this is really weird, right? Abraham's pulling a Tony Randall, right? Abraham's pulling a, who is the guy that used to be on CNN? Larry King, right? He's having kids at this advanced age. No doubt that is what led the sages to conclude that this was Hagar, which would make it a little less strange. Listen, it's not as weird. It's just Hagar. It's fine. Now, what Abravanel assumes, however, is that Abraham would not have done anything that was contrary to what God had wanted him to do. So he continues on. I presume it was the Holy One who prompted him to do this, namely so that he could fulfill the promise God made in 17:6, I will make nations out of you, and would stop Ishmael from being so proud of being Abraham's son and from thinking he could simply split the inheritance with Isaac. Now he would just be another son in the list of sons. Keturah was no doubt a Canaanite or a Philistine or an Egyptian, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter who she was. Isaac's mother and Isaac's wife, through whom the covenant would be carried on, were from Abraham's own family in his own country, and that was all that mattered. The second wife was just for Abraham. Doesn't really matter. Which, if we think about it, so this Torah portion, of course, is connected to a Haftarah. Anybody know the Haftarah for this morning? The Haftarah for this morning comes from the first book of Kings, the very beginning of the book of Kings. In the beginning of the Haftarah, King David is very old. And even though they keep putting blankets on top of him, he's chilly all the time. He's cold in his old age. And so they say, you know what? Let's get him a new wife, right? And they find him this virgin named Abishag the Shunammite. And he marries her, although he's not intimate with her, but he lays with her and helps to keep her warm, right? So basically what Abarbanel is saying is that, look, it doesn't matter who she was, because all of this, it doesn't abrogate the fact that the covenant was going to go through Isaac. And that's the point that comes in the last couple of verses that we read here, right? As Cynthia was saying to us a minute ago. Abraham willed all that he owned to Isaac. But to Abraham's sons by concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. Right? You with me? Verse stays? All right, now Cynthia, ask that question again about the concubines, because you asked it before and it was perfect, and we got to do it.
Okay, so if he marries Keturah, she's no longer a concubine. So who are these other concubines, the children from them?
Fabulous. Great question. Okay. It says he marries Keturah, right? So by extension, we have to assume that she was a legitimate wife, which tends to be the way that we sort of understand this term concubine, right? This tends not to be a term that we use nowadays. I don't know if I've ever actually used that word in polite speech, but it's not something that's sort of part of our common parlance nowadays. The text suddenly brings this up. Now, there's not mentioned anywhere that Abraham had any other, maybe he did. Somebody in my class this morning suggested to us that, look at, Abraham was a wealthy man. Abraham lived in a tribal society. A wealthy man in a tribal society at that point, it's sort of accepted. It's sort of just understood that he would have other partners, right? He had his harem. He had his secondary wives that he dallied with. And presumably, Sarah knew about it and was okay with it. Presumably, Katura, whether it was Hagar or somebody else, knew about it and was okay with it. Now, we look at this text and think it's inappropriate. We can say, how could Abraham possibly have been involved in sexual dalliances with somebody who wasn't his wife? We think that because we're bringing our own 21st century values to this story and looking at it through that lens. It may not have been the case back then that Sarah would have thought that it was strange or odd or somehow inappropriate, or that Keturah thought it was strange or somehow odd or inappropriate that Abraham had other sexual partners who did not count as quote unquote wives. Okay. The other way that the Midrash tends to address this, and some of the rabbinic commentaries touch on this, I didn't include them here because they were taking us too far afield of the conversation, was that by the use of that term, by the fact that it says concubines, but yet doesn't mention any, that we're left to conclude that this Keturah, even though he married her or took her as a wife, her status was not that of Sarah. Her status was not that of a first rank wife, I guess, as you could say it. And therefore, her children were never going to be able to ascend to that level where they stood a chance of inheriting from Abraham. Yeah? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah? Questions, thoughts?
No, I totally we get it because old-fashioned love and romance are never dies. That's what's happening. That's what it's all about.
Good.
I'm just thinking of the contrast with Jacob, with his 2 wives and 2 concubines. All were treated equally, although he had favorites. And while with Abraham, there's such a distinction.
Good. And that's part of the challenge when look, we're used to thinking of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as sort of these and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, right, as these wonderful kind of paragons, and they certainly were, but they didn't. Jacob is really the one who gets it. Okay, Abraham. How many sons does Abraham have?
At least 8.
At least 8. Right? At least Isaac and Ishmael, and the 6th that are listed here. He's got at least 8 sons. How many does he pass the covenant down to?
1.
Okay. How many sons does Isaac have? At least 2, right? Jacob and Esau. How many sons does he pass the covenant down to?
1.
How many sons does Jacob have?
12.
12. How many does he pass the covenant down to?
12.
12. Good. God gives the brit. God gives the covenant to Abraham. But Jacob is the one who unlocks how it's supposed to work. Abraham is not able to get out of his head into thinking that he can give the brit, he can give to the covenant to more than one son. Right? He assumes he can only give it to one. Isaac is never able to break out of that mold, to understand and to know that he has an option. He can give the brit to more than one son, but he doesn't. Jacob's the only one who understands that. Jacob is the one who realizes, I don't have to pick one son or another son. I can give it to all of my sons equally. Right? It's the reason why nowadays there's 13.5 million Jews in the world and not just 20. Okay? Because it occurs to Jacob that he doesn't have to just pick one. It's fitting that Jacob's name was changed to Israel, right? And that we are called the children of Israel, because it was Jacob, nay Israel, right, who it occurred to to create a system whereby the brit, the covenant, didn't just have to get down from one father to one son. It could be handed from father to sons, plural, to daughters, plural, that it was something that could be given to everybody equally and thereby spread out. Okay. Gentleman in the green shirt, your names don't pop up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Brad.
Brad, lay it on me, buddy.
If Keturah is a concubine, wouldn't Hagar also be a concubine? And therefore, since the word is plural, concubines, doesn't that mean that Hagar and Keturah are indeed two different people?
It could possibly mean that. It could certainly mean that. And there's certainly an argument. There's certainly a way that we could make that argument, Brad, where we could say that. Who does it mean when it's, what does it mean when it says concubines? Well, it's Hagar and Keturah. Okay. Quite possibly we could certainly understand it that way. Look, ultimately, the goal of this section is to reinforce for us and to let us know without question, right, that even though Abraham's gotten married, and even though he's had more kids, okay, the brit, the covenant, that stays with Isaac. Isaac's the one that inherits after him. Now, look, take a look at the list of names here, okay? She bore him Zimron, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua, right? Sheba and Dedan are included in here. Ashurim, Letushim, Leumim, Ephna, Efer, Enoch, Abida, Eldah. These are all these names here. Some of these names are familiar to us, aren't they? Tell me one of the names on this list that's familiar.
Sheba.
Say it again.
Wasn't there a Sheba?
Sheba, good. Sheba's a place down in Africa. Good. Other
Midian.
names on this list that are they're familiar. What other names are familiar to us on this list?
Midian.
Midian, good. Who are the Midianites?
Miriam, Moshe's wife's people.
All right, the Midianites.
First tribe.
Say again now.
Zipporah's people.
Say again now.
Zipporah's people.
Good. Zipporah's people, right? Zipporah's father, Jethro, or Yitter, or Hobab, or Ruel, whatever his name is in any particular place, right? He was Kohen Midian. He was the priest of Midian. He was a Midianite. Okay? The Midianites lived toward the east of the land of Canaan, and they proved to be a thorn in our side. The Midianites are a pain in our tuchus for most of the story. Okay? What other name? There's another name that's familiar to us on this list. You might not recognize it. Say again now.
Enoch.
Enoch, good. This is not the same Enoch. This is a different Enoch. That name is one we've heard before. The Enoch we know lived a bunch of generations before. He was back in the first part of the book of Genesis. How about these guys? Who are these guys? The Ashurim.
They probably ended up being some African country.
Say again now.
Hey, don't ask me. This is way above my, I don't know.
Oh, that's why we're studying it. The
Aren't
Ashurim.
Aren't those the Syrians?
The Assyrians, good. Yes, the Assyrians who lived north of us in Anatolia and the northern part of Syria and Lebanon, right? This other great kingdom that we were contending with through much of our history, okay? Look, the reason why this is important, okay, whenever I talk about the book of Genesis, one of the things that I always try to remind people is one of the goals of the book of Genesis. One of the prime goals of the book of Genesis is origins. Where did everything come from? Where did the world come from? Why are there stars in the sky, right? Where did all the animals come? Why do the animals have the names that they have? Why do men and women seek each other out? Why are there so many languages in the world? Right? Why is there a rainbow in the sky after a storm? Okay.
Rabbi, you want to answer the Tower of Babel, the flood? God gave Adam and Eve in the garden and to procreate and for love. And there you go. It's the history of creation.
The book of Genesis is all about giving us these origins. Okay. These are the origins for these people. These are the origins for this people. And what we learn from this is that these people, the Midianites, they're kin. They're our kin. Why are they our kin? Because they're the descendants of Abraham. The Ashurim that we're going to encounter many times throughout our history, they're our kin. Why are they our kin? Their ancestor was Abraham, right? Sheba. Okay, now the other characters on this list that we may not see or know of, okay, they're important and they're our kin. We're related to them, right? Part of the goal of this story is to let us know what our connection is to all these little groups that are around about us, right? We're related to one another, right? You with me? So far, so good?
So far, so good.
All right, let's bravely forge ahead here. Here's just this one little comment from our friend Radak, who says that Abraham did this while he was living. Clearly, there'd be no dispute about the inheritance after his death, right? He gave these other sons that Keturah bore to them. He gave them their inheritance while they were still living, and then he sent them away. He sent them off so that they shouldn't be a burden to Isaac, that they wouldn't get in his hair, okay? That there wouldn't be any question that they would somehow have a share in this inheritance. He'd sort of given them an inheritance and said, that's all you're going to get from me, go on. Okay? All right, let's take a look at this next section. This is Genesis 25, verses 7 through 11. This, dear friends, was the total span of Abraham's life, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre. The field, the exact same field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah and his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near this place, Be'er Lahai Roy. Okay, Brad.
Well, Rabbi, before we leave this topic of marriage,
yes,
I mean,
sir.
The patriarchs, it was important that they all marry kin. But by the time we get to Joseph and then Moses, they don't marry kin. And how do you explain that shift in thinking?
Good. Listen, how do I explain that, or how do the rabbis explain that? Because they're sometimes different things, Brad.
Well,
so listen, the rabbis suggest for us that actually our patriarchs did marry kin, and there's a midrash that says that Asnat, the wife of Joseph, was actually an Israelite. She was a Hebrew, and there's a whole story about how it was that she was adopted by Potiphar. And therefore, Joseph doesn't marry a shiksa; he marries an Israelite.
That's a stretch.
Okay. And even this, that's what I said, right? Even the story with Moses marrying Zipporah, right? If Zipporah is a Midianite, it doesn't matter that she's a Midianite because it's kin, right? The Midianites are the offspring of Abraham. So in reality, Zipporah is marrying into this clan, this group that's allied to us. So it's not such a strange thing. Hang on just a second, because this beam of light on my face is driving me nuts. Give me 2 seconds. There we go. All right. What I'll say is this. Look, we're bothered by this because within our sort of modern rabbinic Judaism view of the world, we prize above all else that you should marry within the group. Historically, Jews have practiced endogamy, right? We marry within our own community. It's not at all clear to me that that was the case in biblical times. Nowadays we're accustomed to thinking that it's very important that my son marry a Jewish girl, because then the children would be Jewish, right? Because tradition tells us that only the child of a Jewish mother or somebody who's converted should be counted as a Jew, right? I don't think our ancestors worried about that as much. For them, the important thing was not who the mother was, but who the father was.
Father was.
Right? Why? What is connected to who your father was? What's the key in father?
Abraham?
No. Who is anybody that call a Kohen? If you're a Kohen, raise your hand. No Kohanim? A few. Okay. Anyone that call a Levite? If you're a Levite, raise your hand. Okay. Why are you a Levite?
Because your father was.
My father
was a Levite, right? For our ancestors, it was far more important who their father was, not who their mother was, but who their father was, because your tribal affiliation went down through your father's line.
Well, but it was very important for Abraham that Isaac not marry a Hittite.
It was important for Abraham that Isaac not marry one of the local girls. But what we see moving forward with our other ancestors as they go through this process, the key goal for them was to marry somebody from within their own, the essence of it was passed down through who the father was, because that was your tribal affiliation. That's what mattered, right? If you were from the tribe of Gad, if you were a woman from the tribe of Gad, and you married somebody from Issachar, right? You left your status as a Gadite and became an Issacharianite. However we want to parse that, okay?
That was good.
The tribal affiliation was the key piece, okay? Look, I think in some ways this reflects an earlier, this is my opinion, take it for what it's worth, okay? My opinion, and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee, okay? My impression of this, my approach to this is that for our ancestors, at least the time that this book was being written, they didn't worry so much about who mom was. Their main concern was who dad was. That was the key. That was the core for them. That was the essence. And it changed
Rabbi,
with the Romans, but we're not going to get into that. Yeah, Steve.
Later, as I understand it, during the diaspora, as the Jews were moving east across Europe and back into Eastern Europe, as they're expelled from societies, essentially the men went, and the vast majority during that process were actually marrying local women and expanding the community.
Well, they had to. And listen, I know there's a lot of anxiety in modern American Jewry about, all of us marrying non-Jews and everything else. And here's the thing we have to understand. It's always happened. It's always happened. And how do we know that? Because Jews that come from Eastern Europe, they look like Eastern Europeans. Jews that came from the Middle East and Levant, they look like Middle Easterners. Jews that came from Africa had dark skin, right? Jews that came from the Kaifeng Jewish community in China, they look Chinese, right? That only happens if you marry with the locals, right? So we know historically Jews have practiced intermarriage. Okay, maybe it hasn't been as extreme as it is today, as challenging as it is today, as potentially problematic as it is today, okay? But it's always been part of the Jewish experience, and we know that because Jews who came from different places, they looked like the people that lived in those places, okay? All right, so let's take a look at this. So Ibn Ezra, another one of these great biblical commentators who was writing more or less contemporary of Rashi, says, he was gathered to his kin. And some say this refers to the soul being gathered to its kin, since it's really something separate from the body. When it parts from the body at last, it be gathered once more to its kin. This reuniting that happens in Olam Haba, in the world to come. Others think that this is simply an idiom, meaning of that person. He has gone the way of his kin, literally as the Hebrew says of his fathers, if he was now rejoining them. Indeed, Abraham was told, you shall go to your fathers in peace, right? Ibn Ezra's main goal as he studied Torah was to try to provide us with a simple understanding of what the text means. What does it mean that Abraham went to his kin? Well, there's some people who talk about it being Olam Haba, and some say, it's just an expression. It's a way of saying he died without having to say he died, because sometimes that doesn't sound as nice. Okay, now Nachmanides has got a good comment in here. I'm going to skip it for now because we're running short on time, and I want to get through this last shtickle of text here. All right. All right, let's talk about this last section here in verses 12 through 18. This is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and their encampments. 12 chieftains of as many tribes. Okay? Who does that sound a lot like?
12 tribes.
12 tribes. Right? We've heard this story before. Okay. Part of the reason why this story is challenging for us, part of the reason why this story is problematic for us is because here we have the story of Ishmael, who was born to Abraham, one of Abraham's sons, and he ends up being the father of 12 tribes, just like our ancestor Jacob, who is the grandson of Abraham, becomes the father of 12 tribes. So we have the potential here for this sort of conflict between different versions of the same story, right? One had it that it was Jacob, our great ancestor, who was the man who had 12 tribes that all of this covenant went through. And this other idea that it was Ishmael, who was the father of 12 tribes that everybody in the covenant went down through. Right?
This may be a stupid question.
No stupid question, Steve.
Well, why didn't they just edit that out? Because this is all put in writing,
yep,
to explain things. And, they do a lot of things to massage whatever to get to the end result they want. So why does this stay there?
Great question. So here's what I'm going to tell you. When I was in rabbinical school, I had a professor of Bible. His name was Hanan Brichto of blessed memory. And Dr. Brichto was a brilliant, brilliant man. And in fact, he was so brilliant that he had to invent some of his own terminology so people could understand what the hell he was talking about. Unfortunately, the year I studied with Dr. Brichto, he was very ill with pancreatic cancer. And he ended up passing not long after the semester that we studied with him. And Dr. Brichto used to be very critical of the way some people approached the text. Now, many of you are probably familiar with what's called the documentary hypothesis, right? This idea that the Torah scroll that we have today, the Torah that we know, was not the product of one person at one place at one time, but was rather the product of many people working in many places at many times that put together sort of this composite text, that there are at least 4 identifiable authors, shall we say. That doesn't mean that we think it was a particular individual, but 4 schools of thought or ideas that came together to create this text. There's a lot of times when we read something in the Torah and we say, this was a scribal error, or that we say, this was an editing mistake, or they didn't know what they were doing. Right? Now, Dr. Brichto used to chastise us whenever we made this suggestion because he said, listen, he said, the author of this book or the authors of this book, whoever they were, they knew Hebrew better than you ever will. Not only that, but they knew what they were doing with this text. They understood the text and the history and the people far better than any of us ever will. For us to say that they made a mistake, for us to say that they made a scribal error, for us to say that this wasn't supposed to be in there, that's chutzpah. I mean, that's chutzpah, right? So he said we have to understand and realize that these stories are in there for a reason, that the text is put together as it's supposed to be for a reason, that it reads the way it reads for a reason. So we have to be left to assume that there was a reason why they saw fit to include this story.
And what was it?
What was it?
Yeah.
I don't know. You tell me. Look, think about this, right? Think about Abraham, right? Abraham and Sarah. How many times does Abraham and Sarah go someplace and he says, oh, it's not my wife, it's my sister? How many times does Abraham do that? He does it a bunch of times, right?
Really? I thought he only did it one time.
No, he does it. He does it with Pharaoh, and he does it again with Avimelech, right? Now, here's the thing. He does it with Avimelech, and then Ishmael does it with Avimelech. You would think Avimelech would have learned after the first time. How come he didn't know, right? How come he fell for the same ruse, right? It's like the first time you pick up the phone when they're calling about your car's extended warranty, it's on them. The second time you pick up the phone, it's on you, okay? If you fall for the same scam twice, you got to look at your own behavior, okay? The answer to that that's sometimes given is that when this text was being assembled, people knew this story, this ancestor who had gone to Avimelech and had gotten in trouble and said to Avimelech, it's not my wife, it's my sister. And there was one group of people who said it was Abraham that did it, and there was one group of people who said that Isaac did it, right? And the Isaac people were never going to give up saying it was Isaac. And the Abraham people were never able to give up the fact that it was Abraham. So they made it both of them. Abraham did it and Isaac did it, okay? So one explanation is, why was this story included? Because at the time the text was written, there were enough people that remembered the fact that Ishmael had 12 sons who were the father of 12 tribes. There were enough people that remembered that story. If they left it out of the story, the people would have come around and said, hey, wait a minute, you forgot to include the part about Ishmael. That's just one explanation. There may be other explanations. The explanation I like best is the one that I included here at the bottom. So just take a look at what this bit with me, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because I don't want to take you guys too long. Hang on just a second. Let me just read the end of this section, and then we'll, because it's important. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his kin. They dwelt from Havilah by Shur, which is down by Egypt, all the way to Ashur, which is up in the north, and they camped alongside all their kinsmen. Okay. Now, at the end of this story, we have a sense that God has kind of found favor in Ishmael. Right? The fact that Ishmael has been so successful, the fact that Ishmael has been blessed with tribes and sons and wealth and prosperity, it's problematic for us in the same reason that the beginning of this story was problematic. God's supposed to love Jacob. God's supposed to love Isaac. God's supposed to love those guys, the children of Abraham that were the ones who inherited the Brit, the covenant. God's not supposed to have good things to say about Ishmael or any of these other people like Midian or these guys or the Assyrians who've been nothing but a pain in our tuchus, right? Let's take a look at this. This is from Genesis 21. This is from last week, but this is a great bit of text here that we've got to take a look at. Okay? So somebody had asked before about Hagar and Ishmael being driven out of the camp, right? And this bit of the book of Genesis occurs right after that event. That Abraham has driven Hagar and Ishmael out of the camp, and Hagar takes Ishmael, and she's so broken up about this that she lies him out in the desert, and she goes and sits under a tree and she weeps because he's going to die out there in the wilderness. The Torah tells us, God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "Nu, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy, hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and she filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. Right? And he survives. Now, this happens at a place called Be'er Lahai Roi, the same place where Isaac goes to dwell after the death of Abraham. Right? So this place is significant. The fact that this happens at Be'er Lahai Roi, this well, is significant. It places this place in this event within the context of the story of Abraham and all of his family. Okay, so Rashi gives us this beautiful line here, which is he's cribbed it from the oh, wait a minute, did it not? Oh, goodness gracious, that's why the page cut off. All right, I'll tell you how it goes. It cut off. I don't have it here. I'm sorry. I owe you a page. All right, this is what happens. Ba'asher Husham, this is the line in the text. that God heard the cry of the boy, quote, where he is. Now this is a non sequitur, right? This is what the rabbis call Lashon Yitera, superfluous language. Why does the text have to tell us God hears the boy crying from where he is? Where else is God going to hear the boy crying from? Why do we have to be told this specifically? Lefi ma'aseh shehu oseh achshav hu nidon. On account of his deeds today is what he is being judged on. Lo lefi ma shehu atid lasot, and not on account of who he might become in the future. Lefi shahiu malachim hashar. Now this is the part that gets cut off. This is what happens. Ishmael is laying around there in the desert and he's about to die. And the angels, they gather around God and they say, good, let him die. He said, in the future, Ishmael and his descendants are going to be nothing but a thorn in the side of the Israelites. And specifically, he's going to destroy them with thirst. And it's a long excursion. Just go with me on this, okay? And they say to God, he said, this one in the future is going to be destroying your people with thirst. And yet you, oh God, open up a well for him, right? Better you should let him die, and he shouldn't be a burden to our ancestry, right? To the rest of Isaac's family and the rest of Abraham's progeny. And God says to them, let me ask you a question. Right now, is the boy a tzaddik or rasha? Right now, is he a just person or is he an evil person? And the angels say he's a tzaddik. And God says, I'm judging him based on who he is today, not who he will be in the future. Right? That's what this line means, Ba'asher Hushab, where he is. I'm judging him based on who he is now. Ishmael was the son of Abraham. Ishmael was always going to be the son of Abraham. He was always going to have something special about him because he was the son of Abraham. And you can't abrogate that. You can't destroy that. You can't cut that out. That will always be true. In the same way that the Assyrians will always have something special about them because they're the offspring of Abraham. And the Midianites will always have something special about them because they're offspring of Abraham. And they can never, ever take that away.
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
That seems kind of important to me in the sense that it's a way to reinforce that God has now given us free will. And even though he's omniscient, he's not going to interfere.
Yeah. In some ways, it does give us that element of seeing and believing and understanding and knowing that God allows us our free will, and that what we do and how we do it is ultimately on us. All right, friends, I want to be mindful of the time. There's a couple of things. There's one more hand that was raised. Larry, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, it also suggests that a certain universality of man, because if all of these other nations around the Israelites are descendants from Abraham too, then there's some redeeming quality in them.
There you go, right? Universality of man. I like that. This notion that there's redeeming qualities in them, right? Even though we might fight, even though we might bicker, there's their siblings fighting. We should try to find a way to rise above that. All right. Listen, I want to be mindful of everybody and everybody's time. So there's a couple of things I know that we have to get through. And one of the things that was explained to me is the custom here to do Kaddish at the end of our study together. So I have the list of the names for Kaddish this week, and I'm going to read them, and then we'll say together Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, and then we'll wrap up our conversation for this morning. So this morning, we are thinking of the following loved ones and individuals of the extended Wilshire Boulevard and University Synagogue family who've passed away during the last month. Miriam Betzalel, Mona Brandler, June Clayman, Deborah Falcon, Ruth Friedman, Alan Gardner, Rhoda Goldstein, Mimi Lieber, John McNichol, Nicole Neiman, Michael Plattis, Michael Ravkin, Miriam Sarachik, Ron Solomons, Ronnie Stabler, Stephen Weiner, and Deborah Werner. We also think of all of those who've died defending the United States of America.
Amen.
We also list the names of the following yard sites that have occurred during this past week. Morris Abrams, Paula Almond, Arlen Howard Andelson, Matt Barish, Bernard Bash, Teresa Ruth Bell, Jean Bennett, Benjamin Block, Richard Block, Sarah Blum, Ruth Channon, Bernard Chapman, Laura Cohen, Irving Cohen, Anna Lee Dreyer, Philip Engel, Harry Ensler, Cynthia Eppel, Stephen Fine, Kenneth Flesh, Mark Fox, Irving Gerstein, Lisa Goldberg, Sharon Goldenberg, Bernard Good, Ira Gottfried, Anne Greenwald Hale, Albert Gross, May Eisenberg, Simon Jacobs, Shirley Jacobson, Hinda Kalkstein, Herbert Kahn, Harry Kaplan, Estelle Esther Katz, Rose Katz, Sarah Porton Keith, Bertha Kunik Kleinman, Gerald Koppelson, Bridget Krausen, Sarah Kurtzman, Lucille Landau, David Keen Levitt, Jerome Lechtman, Francis Levy, Ida Lieberman, Samantha Mack, Robert Craig Markowitz, Esther Medina, Barbara Black Miller, Beverly Mitchell, Helen Mittler, Jack Moyer, Carol Neustadt, Ellen Parker, Sherman Paisner, Harold Perliter, Bernard Peel, Adele Pollock, Joseph Reams, Ira Ressler, Louise Rhodes, Mildred Rodstein, Erwin Rosenblum, Barbara Rowan, Ethel Rubin, Mary Schultz Blitzer, Harriet Francis Schwartz, Jean Shapiro, Kate Schwartz Shapiro, Ethel Sherman, Edna Stein, Eileen Sweet, Richard Talman, Samuel Taub, Joanne Jocelyn Troy, Julius Tyfield, Robert Stephen Wegg, Renee White, Rita Yates, Augusta Zimmerman. I want to ask if there's anyone here who has an additional name they'd like to add for Kaddish. You should feel free to call their names out at this time. We think of all of them as well, all of those who died Kedushat Hashem for the sanctification of God's name, the martyrs of our people, all of those who have no one left to remember them. Thinking of them all, we join together in singing the words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, which I am going to pop up on the screen in just a second. Hang on a second. Sorry, hang on. Let me go to the screen share. Kaddish. There you go. Dear friends, if you would like to please rise, we'll say together words of Kaddish Yatom. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Yalmad divrach hirutei, Yamlich malchutei, V'chayechon yom echon, V'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael, V'gala v'zman kari v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shemei Rabbah, V'vorach Amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, Yitbahar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal, Shnei Kedusha, Barichu, Le'ela, Mikol, Irchata, Shirata, Jushbachata, Benechamata, Damiran, Delma,
Amen.
Yehesh Lama, Rabba, Ben Shemaya, Chayim, Aleinu, Yalkol Yisrael, Amen. Shalom, B'Kumah.
Shalom.
Amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn, comfort all of those who are bereaved, as together we say Amen.
Amen.
A few brief closing announcements for you this morning, dear friends. The Will to See, Dispatches from a World of Misery and Hope. Internationally acclaimed philosopher, filmmaker, author Bernard Henry Levy comes to Wilshire Boulevard Temple to discuss his new book. Join us for his only Los Angeles appearance tomorrow, the 31st at 4 p.m. live at the Glazer campus. You can sign up for these programs at WBT at Home. We highly encourage you to check the daily and week mail emails from WBT, which contain schedules for all of the class offerings, because we truly have something for everyone. We hope you've been getting the daily emails, which you can find information and links to all the content that is being produced. Every week you can find Torah study on Fridays at noon, Chevra Torah, that's us, at 9 or 9:15, and the Film Society on October 9th and 23rd at 7:30 p.m., although we've missed those. For a full, complete calendar of upcoming events and links for viewing, hit up WBTLA.org, WBT at Home, with backslash at that. You find all the information on the website. All right, dear friends, I thank you for this time that we had together. I give you thanks. I'm just taking a look at these notes here. It was a pleasure. Thank you. For those of us, if you have any thoughts or questions or suggestions for next week, you can go ahead and hit me up by email. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week. Remember, next week is also at 9:15. I have B'nai Mitzvah next Saturday morning. I won't be off the bima till about then. So I look forward to seeing you at 9:15 next week. Have a great week, dear friends. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you, Rabbi.
You betcha.